Welcome to Block 9 of the Celebrating the States Block of the Month, the Virginia block, also known as the Virginia Reel block. For this block, you'll need at least a 1/4 yard of 2 different fabrics. I chose a red and a stripe. I have stacked my fabric one on top of the other so I can cut both pieces at the same time. That way I'll make half as many cuts. Cut a square 7.5 inches by 7.5 inches, and then you're going to bisect that corner to corner to get 2 triangles for each color. When I'm cutting the corner to corner cut, I'll use the 45-degree angle that's on the ruler to help me line up the cut. You're going to use the same technique for all of the cuts that you make when you start with a square. The next square is a 5.5 inch by 5.5 inch square. You're going to save the extra bit you cut off the side of this for a future cut. I'm just going to keep stacking up my triangles on top of each other so that they're in order when I go to sew them together. The next cut is a 4.5 inch by 4.5 inch square, and from the leftover of that section you'll be able to cut a 3.5 inch by 3.5 inch square. You're going to bisect both of those corner to corner and stack them on the other triangles. For the larger squares, I use a 12.5 inch square ruler. When I go down to these smaller squares, I'm going to switch over to my 6.5 inch ruler. From the leftover of the 5.5 inch section, you're going to cut squares that are 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches and bisect corner to corner to get your triangles. And then from one of the fabrics, you're going to cut a square that's 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches. Do not bisect this one. This is the center of your square. Now it's time to sew. We're going to use 1/4 inch seam allowances throughout. Starting with the top triangle on the stack, you're going to sew those to opposite sides of the square. You'll want to center that on the triangle side. You'll want a little bit hanging off each end. Try to just make it about equal on either side. After you add each set of triangles, you are going to take it to the ironing board and press it toward the triangle units. Have a little ironing board and iron set up next to your sewing machine to make this part a little bit easier. Now it's time to add the next set of triangles. Sew onto opposite sides. You should have a little bit of fabric hanging off on both ends. Center them as best you can. Once you have both the triangles added onto the opposite sides, you're going to cut off the extra fabric that's hanging off the edge and press towards the triangles. You could cut off this extra little bit of fabric with a rotary cutter if you want, but I just picked out my favorite pair of scissors. I did use a little bit of Mary Ellen's Best Press spray to help my blocks lay extra flat. Trim the press square to 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. I like to cut the first 2 sides and then flip the whole block around and cut the other 2 sides. You will continue to add triangles, 2 sets, to opposite sides, pressing after you add each set of triangles. Then you're going to trim the square before you add the next 2 sets of triangles. Now that we're past the first round of triangles, it's a little bit easier to center the triangles on the sides. You can use the point of the triangle to match up with where the point of the previous triangle would have been. Just make sure they're about even, and then that's where you can sew it on. Because you trim after you add each 2 sets of triangles, you don't have to be exactly perfect when you're lining these up, but get as close as you can, and matching those triangles will help. We invite you to hit that like button if you're enjoying our Celebrating the States Block of the Month, and make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss out on any of the blocks. Trim the second round into a square that is 4 3/4 by 4 3/4. When making the first cut, I always make sure I'm at least leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowances beyond the points where the triangles meet. Every time you start adding the next set of triangles to the trim square, make sure that the fabric in the upper right hand corner of the square is the same fabric that the triangle is. Usually when I'm sewing, I'll be working on two projects at the same time or a couple blocks at the same time so that I can just keep sewing without having to lift the presser foot. For this block, I'm just using a little bit of a scrap of fabric to keep my place. At the end of the video, I'm going to show you what several of these blocks together look like, and I'm also going to show an alternate colorway that you could use for this same block. Trim the square to 6.5 inches by 6.5 inches. There's only 2 more sets of triangles to get through till the end of this block, so keep on going. One way to make this block a little bit different than I'm showing you would be to use 4 fabrics instead of 2. You could do 2 different reds and then 2 different blues, or 1 red, 1 white, 1 blue, 1 gold. Any way you wanted to do that. Each time you're cutting out a square though, you'd be cutting out enough for 2 blocks. I think it would be really fun to play around with this block and make a whole bunch using scraps of fabric or old pieces of fabric that you wanted to get rid of, and just keep making all of the different blocks in 4 different colors. If this is the first time you're seeing one of our blocks for our Celebrating the States series, check in the description below for a link that'll take you to a playlist that has all of our blocks in order. Other content you'll find on our YouTube channel include mystery quilts, tutorials, unboxings, and more. Make sure to check it out. Once pressed, at this stage you're going to trim it 9 inches by 9 inches. Another way that you could make this block different than the way I'm showing you is to make it scrappy, so that each time you add a set of triangles, it's a different fabric. This block has gone together pretty quickly for me, and I actually really like the way that the stripe added some extra pizzazz to the block. It has sort of a spiral staircase effect coming out from the center. At least that's what it reminds me of. I think it's a really great look. Join our Facebook group called The Quilted Forest Friends, and there you can share pictures of your Celebrating the States blocks with us. We'll put a link in the description below. It's time to trim the block down after its last pressing to 12.5 inches by 12.5 inches. Cutting the stripe the way I did, you get a stair-step effect on the corners, but if you cut it the other way, you kind of get a spiral out from the center look. This is what 4 blocks together look like, and if you alternate 2 of them on the corners, you'll get a different look in the center. When I was testing the block to get it ready to make for the video, I used some pinks and some leftover backgrounds I had from other projects just to see how the block would turn out. I think these are a lot of fun. It's amazing how different they look depending on how you arrange them. One trick that I've learned is when I want to figure out how to arrange a quilt, I will use my camera on my phone to help me out. So I'll take a picture of my camera, I will print out little pieces of paper that have the picture on it, cut them down to size, and then I can use those to rearrange and figure out how I want to lay out my quilt. It's a lot easier to manipulate these little pieces of paper rather than trying to get these blocks rearranged on the floor. I can just keep spinning and rotating the little pieces of paper until I find the arrangement that I like. I actually did 3 different sets so that I could arrange them a little bit differently each time to see how it looked. This one, I had the blocks where the pinks went the same way, and I have pink and white in the center instead of just all one color in the center. I really liked how this one made like rows of fabric that are all the same. And then just by rotating 2 of the blocks, you get kind of this pink center, and look at how it looks on the sides. I think this has a really cool look. For the last set, I had the white all be in the middle, just to see how that different from the one that had the pink all in the middle. We hope you remembered to hit that like button, to share with your quilting friends, to leave us a comment, and most importantly, subscribe so that you don't miss any of our future Celebrating the States blocks. Thanks for watching and happy quilting!